Spice. No, not the good stuff that you put in a curry, but the evil cousin of weed that all of our vapes are supposedly being laced with. So, how dangerous is it, and what do you need to know about these new drugs from a drug scientist perspective? Now, I say new here, but synthetic cannabinoids are not actually that new. They've been around since the 1970s, and they became really popular back when I was in high school and in college because at that time, Minnesota did not have legal or recreational weed. And so there was this other version of things, this synthetic cannabinoids. So, weed that was not technically illegal. Now, these are still around. In fact, somebody who's a nurse at a prison wrote to me asking me to talk about this because they're seeing a big problem with it right now in prisons. And it turns out that we are on like the fourth generation of synthetic cannabinoids. So we've been seeing these kind of like different versions of them pop up. So for a while, one type is more popular, and then that becomes like very polarizing. So the next one pops up. So it's basically like a whack-a-mole of the synthetic drugs. So, in order to understand just how dangerous they can be, you have to understand what these drugs are and what they are not. So, first, we have like your standard weed. So, this is a plant that contains delta 9 THC, and that is the main psychoactive ingredient in it. So, that is the thing that people are commonly using to kind of get high. Then you have other things within that same plant. So, things like CBD, and the CBD is actually kind of counteracting, as far as we know in science, is like counteracting the THC to kind of like diminish its effects a little bit. And then you have delta 8 and delta 10, and these are also cannabinoids taken from the plant. These are typically considered to be less psychoactive, so don't produce as much of an effect as the delta 9 does, but they do still produce some of an effect. Now, all of these are different from synthetic cannabinoids, which are things like K2 and spice, what I'm talking about right now. K2 and spice work on the same types of receptors. So you have cannabinoid receptors, that's how delta 9 and delta 8 and delta 10, that's how they're all working. But synthetic cannabinoids are new drugs that are made to specifically work on those same types of receptors. And they have more of an affinity for them, and they also produce more of an effect. What this means is that they're more likely to bind to them, and when they bind, they're more likely to basically create more of a rush of that specific neurotransmitter. So what does this mean for the average person? So compared to things like delta 9 and delta 8 and delta 10, it has more of a powerful immediate effect. This is where the problems actually come in. So you see a lot of side effects of synthetic cannabinoids. So instead of just like the relaxation and the kind of mild high that people are commonly reporting in things like weed, you are getting far more of like the psychosis. There have been reports of seizures, of cardiac incidents, a lot of paranoia and delirium, so full hallucinations. They can also cause memory loss and even cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which is something that's been in the news a lot. I made a video about that too. But basically, you have kind of uncontrollable nausea and vomiting after you have been using cannabinoids for a while. Now, the problem is, since there's so many different products out there, people are not necessarily aware that there are these differences between them. So you look at things like synthetic cannabinoids and you're like, okay, they'll produce kind of a similar effect than the actual flower does. But no, it is far more addictive and far more dangerous. So, for example, in terms of addiction, we do see that synthetic cannabinoids actually do increase signaling of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, which means that it is working on the system that most drugs of abuse work on that lead to some of its addictive properties. And it produces terrible withdrawals. So, when people stop using it after using it for a while, they can have things like seizures and heart problems. And yes, they are dangerous. Did you hear the side effects? But also, in combination with other drugs like alcohol and opioids, they are far more likely to cause things like overdose. So, far more dangerous than the actual plant itself. And the worst perpetrator here seems to be 5-FADB or 5-FMDMB, which is basically a chemical formulation for the drug. And if you don't understand what that means, you probably shouldn't be putting it into your body. Which, like, people are buying this for research purposes on the internet or on Snapchat. And that's not a good thing. There is no regulation there. So it could be 5-FADB, whatever you know or don't know about that. But it also could be things like bath salts or rodenticides. So, like, the poisons that kill rats. People are smoking this. So it's typically administered by basically being put in like acetone or methanol and then being like put on either tettered paper that you put on top of other things that you're smoking. Then people like spray it on herbs like mint and thyme and then smoke it, or like sprinkled on top of that too. Like, I don't have the science to back this up because we don't have the science on that. I'll get to that in a second. But like, I'm fairly certain that smoking random chemicals that you found online on top of random herbs probably not good for your lungs. So one of the problems that we have with all of this is that it's incredibly difficult to study. Like, as I mentioned, we're on the fourth generation of these drugs, so they are changing all the time. So how are we supposed to study how many specific deaths are occurring to this, or how addictive the specific substance is when the substance differs every couple of years? So most of the science is done in like rodents because we can't really do the human studies, but also because every time that we get past the preclinical studies to be like, hey, this might be a problem in humans, now it's a different drug. People might have a right to be worried about this. So there's a study done in England where they collected vapes that teachers had like taken, confiscated from their students, and they looked to see how many of them actually had synthetic cannabinoids in them, like how many were laced with them. And what they found was that about 13% of the vapes had synthetic cannabinoids. And it seems like when we keep trying to fix things, we also kind of make it worse at the same time. So by trying to limit the number of disposable vapes, which is, by the way, great for the environment, I will talk about how terrible disposable vapes are for the environment at one point. By trying to ban those, we've just made a new secondary market for disposable vape liquid that is not at all regulated. And this is kind of how this all started in the first place, too. Like, the reason why so many people started using these drugs in the first place is because weed was illegal. And we actually see that synthetic cannabinoid use drops in places where weed has become legal. So maybe there's like a harm reduction strategy here. So spice is one of the kind of perfect examples about why language is so important when we talk about drugs. So spice, or K2, has also been sold as like potpourri or natural incense. That is not what it is. It is synthetic. It is man-made. But synthetic does not necessarily mean that it's dangerous, and natural does not necessarily mean that it's safe. We're kind of preying on people's natural instincts to believe that, but in actuality, those words kind of mean nothing in terms of how dangerous a drug is. There are so many natural organic mushrooms that will kill you in a minute, or over a few days painfully. And next time you meet somebody with diabetes, ask them how terrible insulin is for them, which is man-made and saved a whole bunch of people's lives when we figured out how to actually make it. So like, we need to be really careful when we talk about new drugs and old drugs. When we're talking about the dangers of these drugs, we need to be very clear that not everything is created the same. And even if it's based on the same idea of another drug, that does not necessarily mean that it's either dangerous or safe.